now our MC for the next few minutes is Randy Sanders, a very old friend of Frank's. They worked together since Randy was a teenager. He's now a state director for different Miss USA states and the Miss Universe system. And Randy.
Stephanie, thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming out to remember Frank L. Sweeney. And Stephanie Rauha, of course. And as you mentioned, Marie, Mary Lou, who was a very, very dear friend, and Brother Walt. We're just thinking of all of them. They're in our hearts. They continue to be in our prayers since Frank's passing. She's right. Frank and I worked together for many, many years. I actually worked for Frank. I was an understudy, you could say. My first time with him, I was about 17 years old. I met him at a local pageant in West Virginia. I actually swept the stage. I ran errands. I did whatever Mr. Sweeney wanted me to do. And I watched this man who was the head of Sweeney Group Incorporated, which was a very well-respected public relations firm based out of West Virginia at the time. I learned he was from Boston, and he ended up moving through Ohio through his radio days as a DJ. He ended up in West Virginia as a public relations director. He worked with the Catholic Diocese. He worked with the Miss Universe organization on the state levels. That ended up bringing him to New York City when he became executive vice president of the Miss Universe organization, to 240 Central Park South, where he made his home now for so many, many decades. Really. Miss Teen All-American is a company he developed and was one of the most successful teen systems in the country. He, along with Michael Bracken, one of our guests here today, established the Miss Teen USA pageant. He was a fan of the Yankees. He's a great brother to Walt. He and Marie had a love. He and his mother, Mary Ellen, I had the pleasure to meet one summer. And she was just a delight. You'll see her in the photograph right over here with Walt and Frank. I was her escort to Mass every weekend, even though I'm Methodist. I did a great job handling all of those assignments that were given me. But of course also Lady Steph, who has been his constant companion for so many years here in New York. And I can't say enough about Stephanie. She has really, really been the strength that Frank needed for so many years as he battled health issues. The voice remained, but the body, it did begin to give out over the years. We're going to pay tribute to Frank throughout the next few minutes. We have some special people who traveled the country with him, who appeared on stages with him, and they shared many a good laughs. Frank was a showman. Whether Frank was doing it as a PR man for the Catholic Diocese, the Christophers here in New York, the Miss USA, Miss Universe organization, he was a showman. And he excelled at everything he did. I will share this. I know that from the PR firms that took him to the Catholic Diocese, from the Miss USA state pageants, took him to the top of the Miss Universe organization as the executive vice president. The only thing I'm shocked is with the Catholic Diocese that he didn't end up being Pope. That could have happened, but other things were in store for him. I'm going to bring up a lady that shared the stage with Frank on many, many occasions, and she has some very thoughtful thoughts from her heart. Chris Army is with us. Please welcome Chris Army.
All right, so I'm here to talk about Frank. Shocker, I know. I've known him since I was 19. I was crowned Miss Minnesota USA in 1986, although I represented 87. And the very next weekend he put me on a plane out to Connecticut, where I met Miss Jolene Boyd and Mary Lynn and Stephanie. And so I just wanted to share with you some thoughts about, over the years, what Frank's meant to me and some of our experiences. So, first of all, Frank was a father to me, which I was very fortunate to have two fathers. I'm good. Got the tissue. My real father had amazing attributes, and they were like yin and yang, because everything that my dad was, Frank was almost the opposite. Right? So Frank was an entrepreneur and a risk taker. My dad was very conservative and a banker. And for a girl growing up to experience both of those things were amazing. Frank was surrounded by women most of his life. Being in pageantry, my father was surrounded by animals. He was an avid hunter. Frank, at the very first chance he could, moved to New York City. My father bought land in remote Minnesota to be away from everybody. So you see, I'm very well-rounded. But both of them were very kind and generous. And so I'm very lucky. All right, Frank was also a realist, and he was revered as a very successful businessman. People used to call him up for advice all the time. A lot of different people. It didn't have to be about pageants. And they respected his opinion and advice on any topic. I tapped into this a lot, and I gotta tell you, it's the thing I miss the most. But I have to tell you his realist story. So after I was crowned Miss Minnesota, I said, Frank, I need to send all of the judges a thank you note. This is in the suite after the pageant, literally 30 minutes after getting off the stage. And he said, kid, sit down here for a second. Let me tell you a story. Do you remember how they voted for you? We gave them each a ballot and they picked the winner, the first runner-up, the second runner-up. He goes, you won by a half a point. There were 3 out of the 5 judges that didn't want you to win. I don't think a thank you note is in order. But this is what we need, right? This is the reality. But the bottom line is I won by a half a point, and I carry that through today. And I love that about him. We need to be grounded, and he did that for people. He made things real. He was also an artful storyteller and very funny. And he would actually laugh quite hard at his own jokes, which I loved about him. Right? His use of silence was extremely powerful. Right? He would lob something out there. And my favorite story he used to tell was, up on stage, he'd call me over and he'd hold my hand and swing it, and he said, I married her. And he let that hang out there for a while, and people were like, oh my God, he's so much older than her. Are you kidding me? No, I did. I married her. I married her to her husband. And he actually, for $50, was ordained a priest for the day, and he did marry us. It was a true story. He always told true stories. But he told them with grace, and you held on with suspension no matter what he was talking about. And I miss those stories. He was also a very good negotiator. Are you on to me yet? He was a father, he was a realist, he was an artful storyteller, and a negotiator. F-R-A-N. Yeah. He taught me how to handle, which is a very good skill to have as an adult, as well as a 19-year-old. And he would do it in such a great way. My first Rolex I bought was on the streets of New York. And he negotiated a very great deal. And he thought that the ability to make sure you got the best deal in the world was a really good thing. But again, he did it in a very artful, skillful way. And I appreciate that about him. And it's a skill I carry today. So the K. He was a kick-butt showman. He really was. A microphone was like a glove for him. And when he'd get up on stage, it was almost like you lit a candle, because he just became alive, and it was in his blood. And he taught us all, and he entertained not just the adults in the audience, but the kids. When we would go through rehearsal, my favorite things for him were Penelope Kickham and Susie Sweet. Those were his 2 examples of kids. And so here we are, live from New York, without him, but with him in spirit, and he's with us all the time, and he is absolutely the conduit that runs between all of us. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to one of my very, very dear friends. She can continue the story.
So how does one eulogize Frank Sweeney, the man, the legend, Swinging Sweeney, America's best known pageant personality? And how do you keep it short and concise, to the point, and only a few minutes long, in true Frank Sweeney fashion? And for all of us who worked with Frank and watched him edit many a pageant holder's farewell speech, this farewell is by far the most difficult of all. When Stephanie asked me to speak, I was so very honored and thought long and hard about the message that I wanted to share with all of you. We all know Frank lived a long life full of experiences that he loved to share with all of us. He truly lived his 84 years to the fullest and touched the lives of so many, as it is apparent here with all of you that showed up today. But I think the one common thread for all of us is family. And Frank was a father figure to so many of us. I was fortunate to meet Frank in 1983 when I won the title of Miss Connecticut USA, and he was the vice president of the Miss Universe Corporation at the time. When I gave up my title in '84, he had taken over the Miss Connecticut pageant, and he adopted me as one of his own. And I never left. I came back to the pageant year after year. That's where I met Chris and Jolene, and then he finally gave me the opportunity to share the stage with him as an MC and a performer. The year was in 1989, just 1 year after I had lost my own father. So he became the father figure to me. And I swore I wasn't gonna cry. I started it. Sorry. I was gonna put this down. So, for over 30 years, Frank was my mentor, my coach, my greatest supporter, and my inspiration. He was so much more than a friend. He was my family. And I'm quite sure that everyone here in this room feels exactly the same way that I do. It is a bond that we all share. When I needed advice on my career or relationships, financial decisions, health issues, or parenting issues, Frank was the one I called. He was so wise and so experienced and so darn smart. He knew something about everything. He was responsible for introducing me to so many others in my life who are part of this Sweeney family. My sister Chris, of course Randy, and Steph, who is the love of his life and like a sister to me as well. So although Frank never had children, his legacy lives on in all of us. I was lucky to share my own children with Frank. Mitch and Grace are here today. And although they didn't call him Grandpa, he certainly played that role in their lives. He loved them from the time they were born, even though Gracie did upstage him when she was only 14 months old. I started bringing them to the city. I'm only in Connecticut, so we would take our train rides to the city to visit Frank on a regular basis when they were only 8 and 10 years old. He impacted their lives in a way that only a grandfather can. When Frank had his first battle with cancer and his lung surgery, when Mitch was in the 5th grade, he wrote a poetry book and dedicated it to Frank. Grace became his ace assistant when Kim Bass invited her to join us on the pageant circuit when she was just 10 years old. Both of my kids have written stories about Frank or done projects on his life for their classes in school. And most recently, Frank spent many hours with Grace, our budding news journalist, critiquing her news packages and offering her sound advice. And it's funny how things go full circle, because I was about her age when Frank would pull me off stage, bring me down to earth, and critique me about my own pageant performance. My greatest hope is that Frank took his final breath knowing what an impact he had on all our lives. I found a quote about family that sums up my thoughts completely. Family isn't always about blood. It's the people in your life who want you in theirs. The ones who accept you for who you are. The ones who would do anything to see you smile and love you no matter what. That is family. So today I say thank you, Frank Sweeney, for being the head of this family gathered here today. Thank you for your unconditional love and support. Thank you for your wisdom, your guidance, and your uncanny knowledge of everything. Thank you for your patriotism, your showmanship, and your larger-than-life personality. We have learned from the best in the business, Sweeney himself. Frank's final gesture to me when I went to visit him right before he passed was to salute me. So with that I say, good night and God bless.
The big world of pageantry that Frank was involved in and we were involved in. But he had another big world. You know, his family, his brother Walt, his mother Mary Ellen. I mentioned this a little earlier. I did have the privilege of meeting Mary Ellen. I haven't met Walt in person, but I've talked to Walt on the phone a few times. And I got to share a story, though, concerning Frank and Walt and their mother Mary Ellen. As a young kid, I was introduced to Frank Sweeney's mom, and I was seated by her at a table. I had to make conversation with Mrs. Sweeney. So, of course, you know, I wanted to impress Mrs. Sweeney, and I said, Frank taught me this, and Frank taught me that, and Frank this, and Frank that. And finally, Mary Ellen interrupted me and said, excuse me, I have another son. His name is Walter. He has a real job. He's a school teacher. And And with that, she said, I really don't know what Frank does. I know he's successful. I don't quite understand all of it. But since Walt couldn't be here himself, he has faced some health issues as well as a very nasty Irma in Florida, where he now resides with his wife. We have the privilege of hearing Walt's words from a gentleman. By the way, I got to tell you this, Jack, you don't know this, but Frank and I would speak on the phone many times, 4 or 5 times a week, I would say. He was my buddy when I was in the car. I'd put him on speaker and we would talk. The only time that he would hang up on me is when Jack would call. And it's funny because he would get a call. Hang on, Randy, hang on. Oh, that was Maria. I'll call her back. Hang on a second. Oh, that was my buddy that shared the baseball stadium with. I'll call. This one and that. Wait a minute, Jack's on the phone. I gotta go. Bye. So with that, please welcome Jack Raha, Stephanie's brother, and he has some words that were sent up from Brother Walt.
Steph gave me the great privilege of reading this letter from Frank's brother Walt, whom I have never met, but heard him speak about and Steph speak about so often. I'm of course reading this in the first person, which is the way Walt wrote it, but keep in mind that these are his words and not mine. So, and here we go. No impersonation of the voice, however. I am thrilled that this tribute to Frank is being held today and regret that I cannot be with you due to my own health issues. Frank was, who in many ways was larger than life in the person, and I knew the longest person in this life. You see, he was often my counselor, my protector, my friend, and my only sibling. For those of you who loved him, what you saw was what you got, and was exactly what he was. It was hard not to like him, because he liked you first. He was well-read, self-educated, and expected intelligence in conversation in return. Whether it was sports, entertainment, the arts, history, or current events, he was interested and prepared to speak. Frank suffered fools poorly and would show his impatience readily. We are here today to honor one of the kindest people you have known in your life. Totally non-judgmental, you saw the very best in people. You see, Frank was one of the most outstanding members of the entertainment community. As the father of 5, the grandfather of 18, and soon to be a great-grandfather, I was honored that a man of my brother's character and high standards was the weekend parent of the hundreds of young ladies who participated in the pageants over the years. All these young people were in good hands, and he expected the best of them. I take this opportunity to thank all for coming to celebrate this great man, whom I am privileged to call my brother, and publicly thank Stephanie for the wonderful care she had provided to him, as well as the love and friendship she has given to my wife, Linda, and me over these many years, and now in these few heartbreaking months. We will always love you, Frank, but for now, good night and God bless. And thank you, Steph, for giving me the honor of it.
I'm anxious to meet those of you that I haven't met yet at this gathering. The world of entertainment was very important to Frank. Sports, of course, he loved his Yankees. And I got to tell you, he loved the city. He loved 240 Central Park South. I know there's many here that share that residence, that address, that have worked with Frank there. There's many here that met him through Stephanie. It doesn't matter how you met Frank. You had the privilege of meeting Frank. And you had the privilege of seeing that big smile and that handshake and that hug at times. So it is just such an honor to be a part of this celebration. It really is a celebration. It is a memorial. Frank is going to live on. I can tell you, when Stephanie calls me from the apartment phone, Frank's face pops up on my cell phone. And it's such a great feeling. And there's so many times I reach for the phone still to call Frank, to share a story, to share something that has happened. And sometimes Steph has to take that call and put up with me, and I appreciate that, Stephanie. So I do chat with her from time to time on some of those road trips. A few things in closing. I've got a briefcase. Mitch, if you'll grab that brown briefcase for me. Something I think is pretty unique. Years ago, Frank gave me something, and he said, listen, Randall, if you have an important meeting to go, this is the briefcase for you. And this is Frank's briefcase with his initials on the inside. There's no more important event that I could carry this briefcase to than this event today. So this is one of the things that Frank left me that will always be a treasure for me. We have some items we want you to be sure. Oh, yes. Oh, that's right. And we do have a correction, or I missed something in the show. I folded it up a little bit too quick before we get to the closing. Let me see. We have the Walt's remarks. And tell me again what we're doing, Stephanie.
Walt's son, Frank's
Oh,
nephew.
oh yes.
As read by
Sure.
Cynthia.
Cynthia is reading something else from Walt's nephew, or from Walt's son, who is Frank's nephew.
Yeah.
Now I have it right. Yes. So Cynthia Raha. Let's give Cynthia a round of applause. Come on.
As I write this, Frank's beloved New York Yankees and my beloved Red Sox are in the waning days of the pennant race. Not terribly unusual for late September, but poignant for me this time around, as I can't help but think that this would have been the first thing Frank and I would have talked about during one of our telephone calls. I spent much time in my car driving to and from work meetings, often finding myself on the road in the early evening. I had gotten in the habit over these past few years of calling Uncle Frank during my evening rides. The trip from, I better get this right, Worcester? Thank you. I knew I'd be corrected there. To Plymouth, my usual route, is a long one after a busy day of work. Frank had a way of making those rides quite a bit more interesting, as I think we've all heard here. He didn't put that either. From the minute I heard him answer the phone in his broadcaster voice, Frank Sweeney, I knew I was in for 20 minutes to half an hour of good quality conversation. Frank was a great conversationalist, not merely talking to hear himself, but instead usually imparting some wisdom. We talked about many things, but not surprisingly, mostly about sports. I would often rip him about the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry, asking him how a kid from Boston could grow up to love the Yankees so. He made no apologies. He was an unabashed Bronx bomber through and through, and he loved the old Yankee Stadium. Amen to that. We also talked about family. He was fond of telling me stories about my grandmother, Mary Ellen, his father, Francis, and my father, who just happened to be Frank's little brother. I better not say what I was going to say. Okay, I won't say it. It's just a nickname that Frank had for Walt. Although they took very different career paths, I also got the sense that Frank and my dad reveled in each other's successes, and despite the lack of physical proximity, shared a very strong bond. During my childhood, I loved telling my friends about Uncle Frank. I bragged that he had interviewed John Lennon, was the voice of Miss Universe pageant, and was a legend in the beauty pageant business. He even gave my brothers and me a worn Pittsburgh Pirates shirt that he had gotten along the way. We fought over that one for years. And if challenged by one of my friends about my account of Frank's career, all I had to do was to produce one of the many beauty pageant programs that he has sent us over time. My most recent conversations with Frank were really a renewal of an earlier bond we had formed during my college days in the mid-'80s. During that time, I made an annual trip to New York and Madison Square Garden to attend the Big East basketball tournament. During a number of those trips, I would make my way over to Frank's apartment. We would talk, of course, and he would take me out to lunch. And when I turned to leave, he'd say, "Hey kid, great to see you." And he'd slip me a $50 bill. Many years later, indeed, only a few years ago, I returned to New York for the Big East tournament, and I had the chance to have lunch with Frank and Stephanie. We met at the Red Eye, and we had an absolutely fantastic 2-hour lunch. I remember that as I prepared to get into a taxi to return to my hotel, Frank insisted that Stephanie get a picture of the two of us together. I am so glad we had that opportunity, and I wish I had only had more. As I reflect on Frank today, I truly believe he is up there looking down on this pennant race, hoping the Yankees will catch the Red Sox for the division, but more importantly, hoping that even as a wild card playoff team, his Yankees will win another World Series. I will still root for my Red Sox, not my Red Sox, as Frank would expect nothing less. But if the Yankees do win this year, I will smile and think that one was for Frank.
And mentions about some things here at the table. We have a notebook that is out, and we'd love for you to write something in it, just a personal memory or something that we could send to share with Walt and Marie, so they can feel like they were more of a part of this event. So please write something, in the notebook before you leave. There are some items that you should pick up. There's a copy of the obituary from the Wheeling, West Virginia newspaper that really covers Frank's life from start to finish. Some scratch-off games. Frank always got a kick out of the scratch-off games. Didn't win a lot, but there's some scratch-off games there. So hopefully you can take one and you can be the big winner, and you can pay for this same kind of an event of the year, here at the Red Eye. Desiderata is a well-known saying that Frank liked. He had at his desk for many, many years. So please, pick those items up, write something in the book. It would be so meaningful for you to do that. You don't have to run off. We're here until 4, I believe, right? There's plenty of food here, please. Stephanie worked all night preparing this food, sort of. So, please enjoy that. And make sure you say hi to each other, get to know each other. That's what Frank brought us together for, So I'm going to wrap it up. I got to do it one final time. Good night, and God bless.